Like, I think when we really think physically about climate change and how it's a global issue, the best thing to do is to get rid of the fossil fuels on the back end as much as possible.
Well, welcome again to the Abundant Minds podcast. We are delighted today to have Margot Paez with us today. Margot is pursuing her PhD in civil engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She also holds a master's degree in physics from Georgia Tech, with her research primarily involving Bitcoin mining. So, besides her academic pursuits, Margot also serves as a Bitcoin mining sustainability consultant. She's contributed articles to Bitcoin Magazine as well as Medium, and her extensive background spans robotics, the physics of living systems, astrobiology, instrumentation, and web-based data management systems. Margot, we're so excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, it's been about a month since we first met each other at Bitcoin is for Everyone in May. How have you been since the event?
I've been great. I've been super busy. I was at a lot of conferences. I think I was in different cities. I was in Portland. That's where we met. Then I ended up in Oslo for the Oslo Freedom Forum. And while I was there, they awarded me a grant for my PhD research. So I was very, very grateful to the Human Rights Foundation
Congratulations.
for that. Yeah, and then I was in Berlin for the German Dirty Coin premiere and spoke on a panel there. Came back to the U.S. Spoke at the Bitmain conference in Las Vegas, which was phenomenal. It had really great response from the Bitcoin mining companies there. And then back to Atlanta for another Dirty Coin screening. And I'm based in Atlanta because I'm doing my PhD here at Georgia Tech. So it was kind of fun to do a Bitcoin, public Bitcoin event in a city where I'm actually living. That was fun. So yeah, I've been all over the place. It's been wild, but it's been fantastic too.
That sounds like a very busy lineup. I'm really happy to have been
Yeah.
sitting comfortably in Oregon for the last month while you've been globetrotting. One thing that
Yeah.
I loved that we were able to talk about is your Twitter handle is one of my favorite parts about you. Jin Erso is a character that in Rogue One is the daughter of Galen Erso, right? The physicist who is, or the scientist who developed and designed the Death Star. We are huge fans of Star Wars here at Abundant Minds. We name any of our data containers after planets in the Star Wars universe. But I'm curious, is there a story or a reason that you've adopted that character as your kind of public handle?
There actually is. I mean, first of all, I was anonymous when I started writing about Bitcoin, and I actually came up with two NIMs, and Jen Urso was my Twitter NIM, and then I had a different one for my writing NIM. But I also used Galen Urso as my picture to go along with my writing NIM, and really, I think her story, she's kind of this reluctant hero, and I thought it would be great to model myself after her in a kind of reluctant hero fashion where it's like, I don't really want to be dragged into this, but I have no choice, especially around climate change. I always think about the choices I made to switch over to really focus on that and completely change my life and reorient it around finding solutions to climate change. And I didn't really want to do that either. The things that I love the most are really have to do with physics and astrophysics and computer hardware, computer engineering, building things. Those are the things that I'm really my passions that go way back. So being driven in this direction was wasn't a choice that I would have made under other circumstances. So yeah, I guess I identify with her a lot, and I just think she was a really cool character, and it was a really great story. So yeah, that's how. So I don't know. She like immediately came to mind when I thought of a Nim. It's just like the first person I thought of.
I love that. We, frequently compare the state of our world and the kind of Bitcoin fight as the fight of the rebellion against the empire. Do you think that there's any merit to that? That there's any kind of legitimacy in comparing our current way of wanting to promote Bitcoin and make sure that it survives in the world as a parallel to the resistance?
Absolutely. I think of this all in a broader context. I mean, not everybody who uses Bitcoin or finds a use case for it feels this way. But I mean, for example, Julian Assange is finally free. And I see a direct connection between Bitcoin and WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and the cypherpunk fight and the fight for truth against the empire, which, is this global hegemony led by the United States. And it's an empire with imperial end goals, right? And Bitcoin played a small role in the ability for WikiLeaks to continue to fight that fight, to fight as part of the rebellion. And I think also against the economic system itself, the financial system. We are fighting a kind of evil empire in a way. And we're using all of the scrappy open source tools we can, finding a way to make use of markets, finding a way to do direct action and to organize amongst ourselves and to teach each other how to do this and to find a way out of this really unjust system. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great analogy, and it's a great analogy I think for anyone who struggles against a David, I mean, like a Goliath, it's the David versus Goliath story. And I think anyone who feels that kind of struggle can relate.
So, with the Julian Assange release, it's a very public topic. It's a very nuanced topic. Do you think, and I'm sure he and his family think it's a victory that he's freed, but do you think that that was a true victory, the way that he was released and the concession that he had to make for his charges?
I think he felt that this was the only way he was going to get out of the grips of the empire. And no one can judge him for taking a plea deal like he did, because he was tortured for 5 years in Belmarsh, and then he was imprisoned in an embassy in a tiny one like bedroom studio, could not ever leave other than to go out on a balcony for 7 years. And and I think that he made the best choice for himself. And is it fair? No, it's not fair. Absolutely. I mean, the US government had to, find a way. They felt that they had to charge him with something before they could let him go. I guess they had to save face or something about it. But it comes at a cost, which is Julian was operating as a publisher, as a journalist. And remember, there really are no requirements for who can call themselves a journalist. The freedom of the press doesn't say you need a credential or you need the police department to give you a little sticker that says I'm press, or you have to wear a sign that says, there's nothing like that. Even though like corporate media would like you to believe that. And I say this as somebody who was a journalist covering the Occupy movement. I know all of that. I know what all of that's about. And so there is nothing that says that you have to have some special credential or education to be a journalist. And so he was a journalist in the way that he was acting and the way that WikiLeaks was set up. And so this one felony charge under the Espionage Act is a threat to freedom of the press. And one thing that Julian Assange noted when he pled guilty was that he believed that the Espionage Act and the First Amendment were in conflict, and that you could not apply the Espionage Act in that way. But he had to still accept it and accept the ruling and whatever interpretation there was in order to be able to get out of Belmarsh and to get out of the extradition that they were trying to do. So yeah, it came at a cost, but nobody could ever tell Julian Assange, oh, you should have stayed in Belmarsh for the rest of your life just so that freedom of the press wouldn't be threatened. Like, it's up to all of us, and it's up to all the members of the press, from independent organizations, live streamers, all the way to corporate media outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's up to them to fight for that right, to make sure that this doesn't happen again and that those rights are returned to the press. So, yeah, it's not the way that anyone wanted it to happen, but I think we're all just grateful that he's a free man. He's back in Australia. He's with Stella, his wife, and his children, his father, his son, his mother. I mean, that's just great. I'm just so happy, so happy for him.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody could say that he should have made a different choice for himself personally. What I think the conversation, and you already addressed it, is it's a dangerous world we live in anywhere that truth is criminalized. And speaking of that, you work a lot with the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and I'm wondering how you feel about that kind of precedent when you're trying to spread truth about something like Bitcoin that is relatively less known. People have varied opinions on it. It's not the kind of thing that has the public press and the long time opinions that people have had around the WikiLeaks situation. So how do you think about spreading truth in a world that seems to not want to hear it?
Yeah, it's scary. It's worrying. I mean, we're all trying to do what we think is right, and we are all trying to do this as free people, believing that we're protected by the First Amendment and freedom of speech. But our freedom of speech is always being challenged, and our governments are always trying to working towards eroding our rights. For example, with the Patriot Act has done a lot to erode our rights, especially in court, in the court system, the legal system. So we're always in danger, and you never know how many steps away you are from being labeled a terrorist under any of these acts, right? So just it's something you think about every so often, and hope that it never comes to that point where some one of us ends up being thrown in a high security prison again. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a real threat.
Totally agree. And we're especially at Abundant Minds, we're very much values aligned with supporting Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And I'm of the opinion that it's one of the better things that you can spend your time and energy on to affect change in our climate and sustainability and the environment and just economically. It's very supportive of energy systems. And I wonder, especially with your sustainability background, if the sustainability aspect is kind of like our Trojan horse for fixing the money. Is that kind of the strategy? Is let people know that this can impact their physical world and the environment, so that we can also slide in the ability to fix the money?
Well, originally, my hope was that I would get climate activists to see the value of Bitcoin and also understand that it was the financial system itself that was causing climate change, and then be able to put the pieces together. Although I tried to put the pieces together for them, and say, climate activists are always saying we want system change, not climate change. But nobody ever presents a solution beyond let's go petition our politicians, let's get the politicians to act. And my argument is, well, what do you do when they don't? And at what point do you say they're not going to do it? And then, so what is the actual solution? So I tried to present Bitcoin as this opportunity, this vehicle for system change that was a financial and economic system that exists outside of our broken financial system and could help us move out of this failing and collapsing system into one that could be more viable. And my argument was that it didn't have to end with Bitcoin, but it could help us get to that next step. So I was actually just like putting it out there, not even a Trojan horse, like get them with but it can help balance renewables. I was just like, no, use Bitcoin. Here's why. But I haven't had much luck, so maybe the Trojan horse route might be a better route. It's very challenging. I mean, there's a lot of people who have completely closed themselves off to the possibility. They really think Bitcoin is awful. And I guess part of why I do the research I do is so that I can have data and studies that I can show people and to make them at least think twice about it,
I think
maybe reconsider.
that's a very intelligent route to go. Especially if you can give people data, you can give them truth, and it is framed in a way that they understand it. You know, it's something that moves minds for sure, better than opinion or emotion or anything else you might use. It's hard to argue with data. I love the quote from Dr. Joe Dispenza that evidence is the loudest voice. But along the lines of that data and evidence, what are the kinds of research studies that you guys do at Bitcoin Policy Institute? Like, what are the studies that you're performing, and how are you getting that data out to the world?
We go across the academic spectrum. We have economists, we have philosophers, we have policy people, and we have me, a scientist. And so we're all over the place in terms of the types of publications we put out. Of course, they're all about Bitcoin or related to Bitcoin. And but my work, I really focus on Bitcoin mining and the energy use, the environmental impact, the use cases. So I've written publications about, for example, the New York State moratorium that passed a few years ago. And then let's see, I had another, oh yeah, and then I last year, or at the beginning of this year, I put out a report that tore apart a research study that came out of the UN, the United Nations University, and just really tried to make it the end all be all of all takedowns of studies and really show why these kinds of studies are bad and not believable. And then I went and did an analysis using the data that they used to show actually here's all the things you could have done, but you didn't. So that was fun. That was like 10,000 words, and then I wrote a 4,000 word like fever dream version for a Bitcoin magazine that got some nice reception. A lot of people found it entertaining, so I was happy with that. And then right now, Troy Cross and I are putting together or finalizing a report that looks at Bitcoin mining and artificial intelligence. So, how are they similar? How are they different? What are their energy impacts now and into the future? So, we call it the locust and the dung beetle. So, yes, that's coming out very soon, and it's a really interesting report. I mean, uh, I don't know if you've noticed, but a number of major Bitcoin companies are starting to buy NVIDIA GPUs, or they're leasing parts of their facilities and retrofitting them to host these GPUs. So yeah, there is a very interesting shift happening, and I don't know where it stops, but it's been very fun watching. But so yeah, so that's what I'm working on for BPI. And then I have all other stuff that I do for my PhD research.
If you're allowed to speak about it, what's your PhD research on specifically?
So it's also on Bitcoin mining. And I I have to write 3 papers for my thesis. And so I outlined my 3 papers this week. And the first one has to do with this study that will be included in the AI Bitcoin policy report. So I collected data from the Bitcoin mining industry, collected energy use data over time, and I think I'm probably the first academic, or maybe the first anyone, to actually do this, to actually go and successfully collect data from more than one company. I got it from 10 companies. And after the reception I received at the Bitmain conference, I'm expecting a lot more data because there were a lot of companies who were really excited about what I presented in my results. Yeah, so the first one is based off of this. They looked at the avoided emissions when you compare the flexibility of Bitcoin mining to a data center that never turns off, which most typical data centers don't have that kind of flexibility. Although I think over time we will see more data centers trying to act as flexible as Bitcoin miners do. But
Mhm.
for now, the industry standard is uptimes as close to 100% as possible. So we looked at what happens when you actually do power down, and we found that, yeah, you actually avoid a lot of emissions if you can provide that kind of flexibility to the electrical grid. And you're not only that, but you're also providing a certain amount of reliability. And if we can get the miners to align with the times when there's an abundance of renewable energy, then you're actually supporting that renewable energy because you're buying the electricity during the times when it's most available. So, yeah, it's very cool. It was a fun study to do, and so my first paper builds on that study, and then I'm also doing some research on the energy efficiency side, and also water usage side, and also looking at building out a model of the network. And I have a few things that I want to do. I'm hoping I'll be working with Gridless on this project, looking at energy development in Africa. So yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and I had to do a lot of work to get here because I was doing climate modeling with my in a different research group, and there was a lot of drama there. And I basically, in order to come back and finish my PhD, I had to raise all the money, all the funding on my own. So thanks to generous donations from a few people in the Bitcoin community, I have a fellowship through the Bitcoin Policy Institute, which pays for my tuition. And then, like I said, I got this Human Rights Foundation grant, so that supports my housing and living expenses. So I'm able to do this full time and finish this Bitcoin mining PhD. So I just say that last bit because I'm very grateful, and there's no way that I could have done this without the support of people in the community, in the Bitcoin community.
Absolutely, and glad that they will support you. I mean, we were just talking about Julian Assange. It was only because of a generous Bitcoiner that he was able to get a flight home, right? It's a community that supports itself, and anybody that's doing good work, I think, should be open to receiving from other people in the community, because anything that we can do to advance this industry, to advance the movement, is something that helps everybody. So if there's powerful voices and very intelligent voices like yours that can be supported, I think it's everybody's prerogative that has any kind of ability to help with that, and feels that they're aligned with the mission to contribute to that. And I love your studies about avoiding emissions. That was one of the things that drew me to Bitcoin mining, was seeing how much it could impact energy systems. And specifically in Texas, I love the story of Berkshire Hathaway wanting to come in and build several $billion of peaker plants, of fossil fuel powered peaker plants. And because of the demand response capabilities of Bitcoin miners being able to turn their load off, it's the same thing whether you take off a load or if you add generation. It's the same effect on a grid, right? So I just love that story because that's a very potent and very real example where taxpayers did not have to pay for an energy project that they didn't need, that was high marginal cost, high marginal emissions every time it needed to be used, when they could just pay an existing business to not use the energy. I think it's brilliant. I think it's such a powerful tool for our energy systems, and I just can't wait to see the way that it continues to impact grid systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I also look forward to seeing how it impacts grid systems, especially as more grids put on variable or renewable energy, because you need a lot of demand side responsiveness, flexibility, and Bitcoin mining really is the first technology to be able to provide that consistently, regularly. And it's really sets the I don't know, well, not the discourse, but it sets
Mhm.
the frame, I guess, for what we should expect loads to be able to do. So very, very curious to see how the other data centers are able to adapt in the same way. And also hydrogen, there's a lot of green hydrogen coming online, and curious to see if they can also provide that kind of flexibility as well.
it's still very early stages, right? And I think Texas is leading the way in some sense. Here in the Pacific Northwest, most of our grid is hydro, so we have that benefit being a miner in the Northwest. But we have that same issue where much of the new generation coming online in our region is renewable and it's intermittent. And we have generation, but also a ton of new load from AI data centers. They're very attracted to the climate, the stability, but they don't have the same kind of interruptibility in general. I'm hearing or reading some things that might be changing, and that people are looking at how they can innovate in that space. But for Bitcoin mining specifically, I see it as the key puzzle piece that allows us to build a renewables-based future while load is growing without having to raise the cost of energy on people or take off certain loads or restrict growth. If you've got this flexible puzzle piece, it makes it so much easier to develop out and know that you've got some kind of backstop, whether it's having guaranteed purchasing of energy, or someone who's committed to be able to turn off when people need to use that energy for their homes, businesses, heating, cooling, whatever it may be. I think it's a very important component, and just want to double click on if there's anything that you are finding in your studies or in your research that points to how we can quantify those impacts.
So quantifying the impacts in terms of the flexibility, or what in specifically?
Yeah, quantifying impacts, and I mean one would be cost. There's definitely a cost of energy associated with having to buy energy from a peaker plant versus buying from a renewable source. I know there's plenty of times in Texas where, because of the availability of wind and solar, power pricing is negative. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, so that's part of, I think that's part of the full paper that I'll be doing. So for this, the data that I collected initially with and did the voided emission study, I'm also going to be looking at the emission factors that we use, because they were hourly, and then also the hourly spot pricing in the different regions where we collected data, to actually see where that alignment is in terms of, what's that marginal generator that's there to meet the load that comes online in that hour. Because just in a cursory look at the data, I did see that, especially the more flexible Bitcoin miners, they were very much aligned with the shape of pricing and demand. So in those hours where demand was peaking, we saw the more flexible miners really powering down, which was great, right? Because they're not using that power. You don't need to bring on that marginal generator. So that's a savings, both from an emission side, but also from the cost to actually have to pay those marginal generators, which is they're way more expensive to maintain. So yeah, I mean that's part of the next step. So I don't have any definitive answers yet, but I'm definitely looking into that, and also I'm very interested in comparing that between the Bitcoin miners in Texas versus Bitcoin miners in other states, because as we all know, or if we don't know, ERCOT, the electric grid in Texas, is a very, very deregulated electrical grid. I mean, there's deregulated electrical grids in other parts of the US, but it's not only deregulated, but it's also islanded from the rest of the grid system in the United States. So it provides a very unique opportunity. And also, ERCOT brings on a lot more power generation faster than the rest of the country too. So there's a lot of really unique things going on in Texas. So it's really, really interesting from a research perspective to be able to compare how Bitcoin miners operate in Texas to the rest of the country. So yeah, I think we're going to find some really interesting results that will be helpful, not just for policymakers, but also I think for the industry itself. So it's just a matter of me actually doing it. And now that I'm done with this policy report, I'm full time on my PhD research. So I think we'll be the community will be hearing some interesting results from me sooner rather than later.
Very cool. And I totally agree. Texas is one of those really interesting, you when you're doing studies, you look for variables that you can control, right? Or something that's not impacted by its outside environment as much. And the fact that ERCOT is a standalone grid that's not connected to any of the other grid balancing resources is a really interesting chance to get to study Bitcoin as a load resource, especially because it's a huge load. I mean, maybe not in the context of the whole grid, but in the context of the network, a huge amount of the Bitcoin network domiciles in Texas.
Yeah, and then another interesting comparison is also to how Bitcoin miners operate on these mini grids, like in Kenya, the way that Gridless operates, where they have a small number of machines on these mini hydro grids, and they're acting both as a buyer of first and last resort, and they're also the price setter for the electricity. So and they also provide a certain amount of demand response too for those grids. So it's really interesting to see how those operations differ as well. And I'll eventually get that data, so maybe in a future paper we'll be able to include that, but for now it's something to think about.
One of our premises for the company at Abundant Minds is that we want to lower the cost of energy in our region through Bitcoin mining. So, our thesis is that if we can go into communities where there's unused resources and that we can provide demand response resources, turn off when we're asked to, provide a load demand when there's plenty of abundant renewable energy, that we can, over time and at scale, lower the cost of energy for everybody that's using that network. Do you think that that's something that has merit? Do you feel like that is kind of the goal of Bitcoin mining in some kind of societal help sense, is to make energy more available to people, or would you disagree?
I mean, I think that that should definitely be one of the goals for all Bitcoin mining companies and for anyone who runs Bitcoin mining machines. I don't know that everybody in the industry is aligned with that idea. I think it really depends on their motives and who their shareholders are. I think that the motivations are not homogeneous, but I do know that there are a lot of Bitcoin miners like yourself who believe in that idea. So I hope that continues to be the most prevalent and winning idea in the industry, because I it is the best one. You always want your industry to do something that benefits society. So I'd love to see that really play out everywhere.
Well, the one of my favorite, it seems like an obvious idea, but in the early 1900s, I believe the Nobel Prize was awarded to someone who uh, explained that enlightened self-interest is the best way to approach any situation. So the best thing for everybody is also the best thing for me, would be the one sentence encapsulation. And I think to the degree that we can build something that helps everybody out, we're doing the best thing that we can for ourselves as well. So that's what we hope to have as an impact. But what do you think? You mentioned Gridless. I love Gridless. I think that's one of the coolest projects that exists. And as cool as it is to lower the cost of energy for people, it may be even more impressive to bring energy to people who've never had it before. Could you talk a little bit about what you think the main impact or the most important impact that Bitcoin mining might have on society is?
I think the most important impact really is on the energy development side, energy access, because one one key aspect of human rights is this the the right to a standard of living that provides a minimum amount of well-being. So that requires electricity, that requires energy, and you need to develop those energy resources out to provide these services to people. Hospitals need electricity. That's one of the most important things that you can provide with energy resources, is access to a state of the art hospital, to doctors who can actually perform surgeries and perform tests that can save your life and give you help you thrive rather than just like barely trying to get by, right? Or only living until you're 40. That and which is, the average lifespan in a number of parts of the African continent are like around 50 years old. So just being able to build out that electricity, the electrical grids, getting people connected, providing it at an affordable price, that's going to go a long way to bring people up to a reasonable standard of living, and that's a human right. So all these people, their human rights are being violated. So the best outcome is for Bitcoin miners to ensure the human rights of people through affordable energy access. And that's also why I love gridless, because I think that they're really they're the living embodiment of that idea, and they're really doing it, and they're showing others how to do it. And they, there are other people out there who are more self-interested, in the sense like they'll just go out, buy up the electricity, mine, and not care. So it's not saying that the entire industry is like gridless, but I would love to see the entire industry like gridless.
So the premise for anybody listening is that if someone is bringing in Bitcoin mining to a community, that you're able to buy energy that previously did not have a buyer and give back energy at flexible times when it's needed. So in your example of hospitals, why couldn't we just set up a hospital and a generation source without something like Bitcoin mining being there beforehand or in tandem with it?
Yeah, the challenges have to do with the wait time to actually, I think, to connect to the grid, to build out the transmission, to actually, so that people can actually purchase the electronic devices. And also early on, it sounds like people, the products that they're buying that they need to plug in actually don't draw a lot of electricity. So there's kind of like this valley of death, in a way, where you don't have enough demand, and you have to get through that valley before you can have a stable revenue stream. And also, you need a way to bring down those prices. So that's why I said that gridless acts as both a buyer of first and last resort, and sets the electricity price, because they're going to come in and they're going to buy up all of the excess energy, and they're going to buy it for a certain low price, but it's going to be enough to make that grid viable in that time when they're waiting for the infrastructure to be built out, and for people, the community, to actually be able to connect things to the grid, like a telephone or a refrigerator or a television or a coffee maker, right? We take all of these things for granted, and they don't take a lot of power. So you need a way to support that financially. And then ultimately, there hits a point where everyone else is going to be competing for that power with the Bitcoin miners like gridless. And of course, the grid operators are going to take the customers that will pay a little bit more. So then that power ultimately will be returned back to the consumers, and those Bitcoin miners that were connected will then move on to the next grid that needs someone to buy up that excess stranded power. And uh, apparently that's already happened. Gridless has already experienced something like that. So that's exactly the blueprint you want to see happen. That's how you know this project is working. So those are the reasons why you need this buyer, because there's this like valley, this time where there's just not enough offtake to financially support that grid.
I can't remember who it is that coined this, but describing Bitcoin as a pioneer species or Bitcoin mining as a pioneer species, I really love that analogy because it's an organism that goes into an environment that is previously hostile to life, does not have any way of supporting life, and makes it habitable for other types of life to follow in its footsteps and build a more diverse community. Um,
Yeah, that's Brandon Quittem.
I
Brandon
love Brandon. He
Quittem.
also does
Quittem.
the mycelium network
Yes,
comparison as well,
yes.
right? So we talked about energy sources with hydro and clean hydrogen. Bitcoin miners obviously are thinking about energy day and night. It's what they lose sleep over. It's what they seek above all else as their energy source. Do you have any advice or a preference for what you think the best energy source is for Bitcoin miners? Or is that too nuanced of a question?
No, I think the best energy source can probably be defined in two ways. One that allows Bitcoin mining to stay decentralized, and of course, the other is it has to be cheap, a cheap energy source. And most of those are going to be wasted energy sources or excess power where there's excess power. And that tends to be renewable energy, hydropower, wind, solar, but also we're finding Bitcoin miners also at landfill sites, also at flared gas sites. So, like for a while, I knew there was one on a pig farm. I mean, I think there's some farm mining going on in Ireland. So yeah, so I think those are the best energy sources. I think with all of the competition that Bitcoin mining is going to start seeing on the electrical grid, that you may not see as much Bitcoin mining on grids in the future. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think stranded energy sources, hard to reach places for other types of operations. I think those are the best sites, the most robust, durable sites for Bitcoin miners. It's the whole dung beetle idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you mentioned landfill mining, which is, just mining off of other people's waste as well as biogas, right? These are ways that technically we're making Bitcoin mining carbon negative, right? We're not a carbon neutral industry. We actually have the potential to be the first carbon negative industry economically. Um, do you think that that is coming soon? Do you think that we still have a while to go? I mean, I've seen estimates that, it takes less than $1 billion for us to develop the kind of capacity on landfills that would take the whole network carbon negative. But do you have any updated sources on that or any opinion on that?
So I don't have any news sources on that. I know Daniel Batten has done his own research on that, but I don't really know beyond what he's looked at in terms of the viability or the amount of money you would need to do it. It sounds like it wouldn't be a lot of money, and it probably would be you know pennies for something like BlackRock to invest in, but I don't really have too many details on what it would really take. But I also think that it's really good to think like, yeah, we on the one hand we're offsetting our emissions, but in the grand scheme of things, you can't really go into the atmosphere and pluck out the emissions you're responsible for. So the best thing to do is to like really make your emissions, your energy resources as close as possible to zero, like physically zero producing carbon emissions, rather than saying like, yeah, half the network is or like 40% of the network uses fossil fuels and 60% uses non-fossil fuels, therefore I'm net negative. Like I think when we really think physically about climate change and how it's a global issue, the best thing to do is to get rid of the fossil fuels on the back end as much as possible. So that's what I would really like to see, not just for Bitcoin mining, but of course for all industries, because ultimately what it comes down to is flipping the back end of our energy resources for everything. So it's not just Bitcoin mining. And I think that if we really are serious, globally serious about doing this, it's inevitable for Bitcoin to also, be zero fossil fuels. It's a societal issue. It's dangerous to point fingers at industries, in my opinion.
I would agree. On the back of that, the climate conversation often has a divergent view on people that choose to mine with oil that's either on their properties or gas that's on their properties. What kind of viewpoint do you take on people using fossil fuels to mine if they're not necessarily like a leaky methane source that's already leaking into the atmosphere?
Well, obviously, I don't like it. I take climate change very seriously. I think we should really be reducing our fossil fuel consumption, and we're really behind schedule on that. And so that's a big problem. And in my opinion, I know that there are plenty of people who mine Bitcoin who disagree with me and don't care if they're on a grid that's 100% coal. I do care, but all I can do is try to promote a different lens, a different way, and to educate people on how to be more sustainable with their operations, and hope that the ones that are more sustainable will outcompete the ones that are on these dirty fossil fuel grids or mining just on, by just directly buying natural gas that isn't wasted or curtailed or whatever, or stranded. So yeah, I'll just keep trying to give the advantage to those who are doing the right thing for the planet.
If you were to set up a Bitcoin mining company for the greatest positive impact that you could have, how would you guide, someone like me who's running a Bitcoin company, or someone else who wants to set it up to be the most positive for the most people?
Well, most positive for the most. I mean, I I guess it depends on the situation, but like I said, gridless is what they're doing is very positive. But I think something that I would love to see, and I don't know yet how how viable this is, but I think maybe this research that I'm doing might shed some light on that, which is finding a way to really truly align pricing with those marginal emission factors.
Mm.
Because if the price signal could be high enough anytime the emissions are going past a certain threshold, that so that it encourages you to power off, you're guaranteed to have this really fantastic tool that will power off when the emissions are high and prices are high. And and so far in what I've seen, the most flexible miners are the closest to be able to do that. So I have to do a deeper analysis. But the thing is that not everybody is operating that way, even amongst Bitcoin miners. Amongst those in our study, the flexibility, the uptimes in the 3 month study that we did was anywhere from 69 to 95% uptime. So there is quite a range of behavior. And we need grids to be able to incentivize behavior that is going to be a benefit both on the reliability side and also on the emission side. So I would love to see a way to link the two within the operation itself of Bitcoin mining. And it either it comes from, like taking like Foreman software and modifying it to a certain degree, or it comes from just changing the pricing structure on the grid themselves. So the grid operators, they would have to probably come out with a different pricing structure just for the flexible loads. So that's something that, I think I might get a little bit more information about with my bigger paper, that's related to the void emission study. So I'm hopeful for that. So I think though, so I think like that would help everybody, because we would be reducing emissions and supporting the build out of clean energy. And that's a benefit to everyone, because climate change is a global issue no matter where you're located. If I'm emitting emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in Portland, Oregon, I'm having an effect on somebody who is in, I don't know, in Nepal somewhere, or in India, or in Moscow, right? I'm having an effect because those emissions go into the atmosphere and creates warming, increases the warming effect, and that's a global effect. So yeah, I would love. I think that's like one simple, potentially simple way that you wouldn't have to do much more than what you already do to be able to increase that benefit to society.
So that would be an example of good policy associating, price signals and emission signals with usage. What do you think is at stake if we start to have really bad policy come out? And what might that look like? In the Star Wars example, if Jen Erso just goes and asks the Emperor nicely to stop killing people and spreading the influence of the Empire doesn't go so well, what do you think is at stake if we have really bad policy and we don't fight for what we know is true?
Well, it's making it harder to mine Bitcoin in places where the energy resources are cleaner. That's a big concern for me. For example, that moratorium in New York, on the one hand, it didn't really harm miners that were mining in areas where there's an abundance of clean energy, like in upstate New York, where there's a lot of hydro and there's also some nuclear. But on the other hand, it sent a signal that Bitcoin miners aren't welcome. And and the Democrats really got behind this, and it led to congressional hearings with Senate Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And that sends a message to all of the blue states, where they have Democratic majorities and, Democratic governor, that Bitcoin mining isn't welcome there either. And those are the states that are most thinking about the clean energy and trying to put transition their grids to 100% clean energy or net zero. So then that ends up pushing Bitcoin miners into states where they're less concerned with clean energy goals. Although that's changing to a certain degree, because these red states are also finding that it's actually very lucrative to have wind and solar too. But still, there were these tax incentives in Kentucky that were very controversial because they have a very dirty grid, and that they were welcoming a lot of Bitcoin miners because they want the tax revenue. And so what happens there is that creates something called emissions leakage, which means that if you had kept that industry in your state, you would have reduced the emissions. But now that you push that industry out, there's the potential that their emissions will increase. So it
Mm-hmm.
backfires. So you think that you're doing something good for the environment because you pushed them out, but actually you did something bad because you pushed them into a location where they're going to be using electricity that is derived from a lot more fossil fuel generators than in your home state where you ban them. So that's the big risk there. From a lot of these policies is that you actually could make climate change worse. And then, of course, these politicians will never take responsibility and they'll just blame Bitcoin miners all over again. But the thing is, all they did was take it off of their accounting ledger. They're like, yeah, we're not responsible for these emissions anymore. Somebody else is. We're net zero. But actually, your action increased emissions for everyone because, like I said, it's a global issue. So you can't just think about what the effect is in your state. You have to think about what happens to everybody by your choice in your locale. So yeah, so that's a big problem. And they also have threatened this 30% energy tax, which would push Bitcoin mining really out of the United States. And you really don't want that either because, for one thing, again, like potentially you could be increasing emissions because they would end up in place, they might suddenly get a better deal in Kazakhstan again, and they're heavily coal. But also you're pushing them into to being aligned, to having to align themselves with other political leaders that may not be so savory. There's, like the majority of the world, like 80 something percent of the world lives under authoritarian regimes, right? So do you really want to force Bitcoin miners into those situations? It's much better to have them operating in more stable environments, under stable governments. So yeah, I think these policies are a net bad for any industry, but especially for Bitcoin because it's really the one industry that is really faced with the threat of being banned. And I think politicians are just very short-sighted. They're not thinking about the big picture. They're just thinking about political wins more than anything else.
I agree, and it's short-sighted, and very important that you bring up that you can make what you think is a good decision locally that has really bad downstream effects for a larger population. That maybe you solved your local problem, but you created a much more serious global problem. And I know New York is not the only one, right? Washington became quite hostile to Bitcoin miners as an industry after 2018 when they started getting a lot of flood of demand. I know there's a moratorium for new loads in BC as well, with BC Hydro in British Columbia. And these are, between New York, Washington, and British Columbia, some of the most abundant clean energy resources that we have in the world, all saying, no, we don't want this load. Um, it's really unfortunate. It's very short-sighted, in my opinion. Do you think that tide will change?
I hope so. I mean, I think it's to the benefit of these grids that they do change, especially if they plan to bring on a lot more intermittent renewable energy sources like wind and solar. You really do need flexible loads, and Bitcoin miners are happy to do that, happy to provide that flexibility. So I really think that what they need to do is to probably change their rate structures to incentivize Bitcoin miners to make the most of their flexibility
Hmm.
so that they're benefiting the grid, just as we're seeing in Texas. So it would be great to see that model everywhere. So I think that's really where it should be. It's really learning how these loads work, how they operate, how you can make the most of them for your benefit, and then set up the structures that make that possible. Because I also know that, so I've talked to people who've said, we are on a hydro intensive grid, and we would love to provide that flexibility, but we don't have the ability to do it.
Hmm.
The grid, the pricing, it's none of it is structured to allow us to do that.
Yes, that's the case
So
in the Pacific Northwest. Is we
yeah,
currently, we want to encourage these programs, but currently we don't get any benefit for curtailment, which is something that we want to push and make sure that it's something that utilities know is a resource that's available to them. Right? It's show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. And none of these utilities have great incentive structures so far for loads like ours. And I think it's a disservice to us, but it's more a disservice to them that they have so much potential to be able to use a grid resource and for it to be economically advantageous for them. But some kind of cognitive dissonance or just a lack of paying attention keeps them from using the resources that they already have available.
yeah. I think I don't know. I wish I could tell you why it's they operate the way they do now, but I think there's always a reluctance to change. There's always a this inertia that sets in, makes it hard to change course. But I think with everything that's happening with the energy transition and the fact that our goals are really to electrify everything, that there has to be some change because you really do need that demand side flexibility. And as far as I can tell, we've really entered that stage where we are no longer in flat demand land. Like we are going to see demand increase for a long time until we get everything on the electrical grid. So, in order to be able to manage all that new load, you have to find a way to incentivize that flexibility. It's otherwise it's going to be very, very challenging. And it's been, for decades that people have known you need demand response as one of those tools to
Mhm.
balance bringing all that intermittent renewable energy.
It's not a new idea, right? Demand response has been around for several decades. It's just finally there's an industry or consumer that can really effectively utilize it.
Yeah, I mean, in Texas, for example, it wasn't until 2020 or 2021 where they actually could say we now have a significant load that can act as a controllable load resources, and they say they're servers. It's a bunch of servers in these buildings that are providing it, right? And it was Bitcoin mining, of course, that was really doing that, acting as a controllable load resource, and that was the first time. So it wasn't until a few years ago that we really saw. this start to be possible.
I think you did say it. It's inertia, right? Grid systems, grid operators, these are very long-term industries. They're very slow-moving industries. So maybe it's just our nature as Bitcoiners seeing things move so quickly in our world to be so frustrated seeing things move slowly in another world that has so much impact on us. But I don't know if you agree. I think there was a lot of inertia going the wrong way up until maybe 2020 or 2021 with really crappy studies like the Alex DeVries data and all these studies that were essentially pontificating that Bitcoin mining would take more energy than the entire world uses, and projecting that by today that would be the case. But KPMG's come out with great reports. I've seen several other very well-respected consulting firms start to kind of turn the tides on how people view this industry. Do you agree that we've started to shift the inertia into the right direction now over the last couple of years?
I think, yeah, to a certain degree we have. I mean, now there's a lot of outsiders who are starting to understand how Bitcoin works, but I still think we have a lot of education to do to really get people to understand. And I'm hoping that the research that I'm doing will be able to contribute to that education. I'm also very annoyed by the stuff that Alex DeVries had put out, and I'm hoping he gives it up because it's not, it's like amongst the worst of the type of energy studies that are out there. So I would love to see people look at my research and say, "Oh, okay, so this is how you do good research on Bitcoin mining, and we can make use of this research to inform our models better." So that's my hope, that at the very base layer, you have this foundation of good research that you can draw on to help educate everybody on how Bitcoin mining actually works.
I love that. We're really proud here in Oregon to be the home of Dennis Porter and the Satoshi Action Fund and Satoshi Action Education, and love the work that they do on the policy side and passing right to mine bills, blockchain basics, whatever they're calling it nowadays. It's a different name in every state. Um, do you see, other than kind of that model policy, any um, really exciting or positive developments in the policy world relating to Bitcoin mining that you'd like to talk about?
Hmm. I haven't seen anything exciting. I think the fact that they're not pushing an anti-Bitcoin mining agenda right now is great. I think that's the best policy you're at for the moment. I My hope has always been that the work we do at the Bitcoin Policy Institute is to at least get policymakers to take a neutral stance, because in general, for all other industries, they have a neutral stance. It doesn't have to be a favorable stance. They don't have to like it, but don't hate it, don't single it out, because it's not really any different from any other industry that's trying to get access to electricity. That's so long as they're not pushing and let's ban Bitcoin agenda, I think that's a win.
What do you hope that your long-term personal impact on this movement is?
I mean, I became very serious about Bitcoin because I was very active in the climate movement, and I saw an opportunity to really make our wildest dreams come true, which was, as I said, system change, not climate change. And for me, I would love to be able to really contribute the right number of words that can really put that picture together. So I spent time doing writing just on my own on Medium, just publishing my thoughts, connecting Bitcoin and economics to climate change and our concerns and our desires in the movement. And I kind of put that on hold so that I could do this research. I had this opportunity come about, and I'm right now kind of like the one person who understands Bitcoin and who wants to do this. So So I want to be able to do that, but I would love to get back to my original goals, which were really more along the system change. How do we get to that next system, and what does that look like, and how does this all make sense from an economic, socioeconomic perspective? So yeah, I would love that to be my biggest impact on Bitcoin, much more than the technical science research that I do. It's really the social side that matters the most to me.
That's beautiful. How, if our audience is listening and wants to help you, how could they be of service to your mission?
Well, they can always give me money. Literally, the best way to help me is to help me be able to pay my bills, because I don't make a lot of money doing this. And, it's expensive. The world is getting more and more expensive. Groceries are expensive. So, yeah, I have a Geyser Fund actually. And I think you can just go on Geyser and look me up, type in my name, Margot Paez, or even Erso, maybe, I don't know, but definitely Margot Paez should get you my Geyser Fund. And yeah, if you'd like to make a donation, if you like the work that I do, please help me so that I can continue to do it, because being a grad student, don't make a lot of money, and it takes a lot of work. And I basically have two jobs between BPI, the work that I do at BPI, and all of the conferences and the policy reports, and then I have my PhD, which is really a full-time job too. And not that the PhD doesn't pay; I have to pay, and then BPI, is just this fledgling young nonprofit, so we also don't have a lot of funds. So really, we need the community to support us so that we can do this good work.
Awesome. Anything that you want to leave the audience with as far as, final thoughts, things that you're working on, things that you're excited about that you want to close out with?
I'm really excited about my research. I like talking about it a lot, so that's what I'm definitely excited about right now. And well, I guess, yeah, keep fighting the good fight, the rebellion, the struggle continues, as they say, and yeah, don't give up. It's a long fight.
Where can people find you? Where can people find your research? How can they keep up with you? And how can they support you after they get off this call and want to stay involved in all the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so best place to find me is on Twitter or X. I'm Jyn_Urso, JYN_URSO. So that's me. Also on Telegram, I also use the same handle on Telegram. So you can find me either way. My DMs are open. And then again, you can find me on Geyser. So I think it's geyser.com, Geyser Fund, Geyser. Just you can look for me there. I think I'm also under the education section, but if you just type in my name, you should find me. I'm on there as well. That's where I take donations. Also, I'm on Noster, but what's my NPUB? I couldn't tell it to you right now, but probably if you also look up Jen Erso, you'll probably find me. And you can send me zaps on there if you want to zap me. I don't post that often on there, but you can zap my old posts, and I do get donations that way. And I think I think my Strike is still connected to my Twitter account. So that's another way you can send me money, goes to my Strike account. So yeah, so I'm also on LinkedIn. You can search for me there. I'm a little bit slower to respond, but you can send me a message there, and I can get back to you as well.
Wonderful. Well, I hope anybody listening to this goes and supports you. I personally am so grateful that you are fighting with the rebellion in this way, and that you're doing it so effectively with logic and data and just true grit and passion, and that you will fly around the world to talk about it, and even come visit us in Oregon. So I'm really grateful to know you, and so thankful for everything you do for our industry, for the movement. Can't wait to talk about how successful we've been again in another episode with you. And until then, really appreciate you, Margot. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a really great conversation.